I need to tell you about the moment my uncle's face went completely white in a room full of people he was trying to impress. But to really understand why it felt the way it did, I need to take you back a few hours first. Actually, scratch that. I need to take you back about 16 years. But let's start with tonight, because tonight is when everything he believed about me shattered in the span of about 40 seconds. It's 8:30 on a Friday night, and I'm standing at table 12 with a bread basket in my hands. The dining room smells like brown butter and thyme, the low lighting catching on wine glasses and the polished surfaces of our handmade tables. There's a hum of conversation, the kind of warm buzz you only get when a restaurant is running exactly the way it should. I'm wearing chef's whites because I'd been in the kitchen 20 minutes earlier checking the lamb temp, and I hadn't bothered to change before running this bread out to the floor. The man at table 12 looks up at me, and I watch the recognition move across his face in slow motion. His eyes widen just a little. His mouth opens. Then he recovers, and not well. Uncle Richard, of course it's him. He blinks twice, then turns to the three men sitting with him. Business types. Expensive watches, tailored suits, the kind of men who are used to being catered to. Richard gestures toward me with the lazy confidence of someone who has never questioned his own authority. "Oh," he says, loud enough that the table next to us glances over. "That's my niece. Maya, just a waitress. Sweet girl, but no ambition, you know how it is." Just a waitress. I feel the words land in my chest, that old familiar ache. I open my mouth, not even sure what I'm going to say, and that's when I hear his voice behind me. "Partner." I turn. Chef Laurent is walking toward the table, smiling that warm, professional smile he uses with guests. He's in full chef's whites, tall and solid, his salt and pepper hair still a little damp from the heat of the kitchen. He reaches the table and extends a hand to Richard, who takes it automatically, confused but still performing confidence. "Mr. Ashford, I hope everything has been to your liking tonight." Richard nods, doing that thing he does where he puffs up just a little. "Oh, yes, exceptional, really exceptional. I was just telling my colleagues here that this place has been on my radar." Laurent nods graciously, then turns to me. His eyes meet mine and there's the smallest flicker there, a question. I give him the tiniest nod. He turns back to Richard. "I'm glad you're enjoying it, though I do need to steal Maya for just a moment. Partner, we need you to approve the new investor contracts before Saturday. And the time's called, they want to confirm the interview time. Does Friday still work for you?" The silence that follows is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. I watch Richard's face. The confident smile freezes. His eyes move from Laurent to me, then back to Laurent. His mouth opens, but nothing comes out. One of the men at the table, a silver-haired guy with kind eyes, looks at me with sudden interest. "Partner," Richard finally manages. Laurent looks genuinely surprised. "Yes, Maya owns 40% of Hartley and Rye, has since we opened 3 years ago. She runs operations, vendor relations, front of house." He pauses, glancing between us. "You didn't know." I watch my uncle try to recalibrate. He's always been quick on his feet, always able to spin things, but right now he's floundering. The silver-haired man is staring at me now, his eyebrows raised. "Wait," he says, "you're Maya Hartwell. I read the profile in Eater last month. The one about the farm-to-table partnership model. That was impressive work." I smile. It's a small smile, controlled, but I feel it all the way down to my bones. "Thank you." Richard makes a sound, something between a laugh and a cough. Well, she never mentioned, I didn't realize." I look at him, really look at him, and I say very quietly, "You never asked." Then I excuse myself, turn, and walk back toward the kitchen, leaving my uncle sitting there with 3 men who are no longer interested in whatever deal he was trying to sell them. But let me back up, because you need to understand how we got here. 3 hours earlier, I was in my office. Not an office tucked in a corner somewhere, my office, the one with my name on the door and the window that looks out onto the street. I was reviewing vendor contracts, comparing quotes on organic produce, and trying to decide if we could justify the cost of upgrading to a better coffee roaster for the second location we were scouting. My phone was on the desk, open to our reservation system, and that's when I saw it. Richard Ashford, party of 4, 8 p.m. I stared at the name for a long moment, that old tightness creeping into my chest. The same feeling I used to get when I was younger, when I'd see his name on the caller ID at my mom's house. That mix of dread and shame and the exhausting weight of never being enough. I could have asked our host to reassign the table to another server. I could have stayed in the kitchen all night. I could have made sure I was nowhere near the dining room when he arrived. But I didn't. Because here's the thing about my uncle. He's never actually seen me, not once in the 16 years since my dad died. He's looked at me plenty of times. He's talked to me, lectured me, offered me advice I didn't ask for, but he's never actually seen me. And some part of me, some petty, wounded part that I'm not entirely proud of, wanted to know what would happen if he finally did. There was a knock on my door. Laurent leaned in, holding 2 espressos. He handed me one and sat down across from my desk, reading my face the way he always does. "You okay?" I nodded toward the screen. "My uncle, he's coming in tonight." Laurent knew about Richard. Not everything, but enough. I told him once late night after a brutal service when we were doing end-of-month numbers and I'd made some offhand comment about not being good with money. He'd looked at me like I'd grown a second head and said, "You're the most financially disciplined person I've ever met. Where did that come from?" And it had just spilled out, not all of it, but enough. He looked at the reservation, then back at me. "Do you want me to handle it?" "No," I said. "I'll work the floor tonight." He raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" I took a sip of the espresso. It was perfect because Laurent doesn't do anything that isn't perfect. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You have nothing to prove, but if you want to be visible tonight, be visible." So that's what I did. When Richard walked in at 8 p.m. with his perfectly tailored suit and his loud laugh and 3 men trailing behind him like he was leading a parade, I was expediting desserts in the kitchen. Our host, Jamie, seated them at table 12. One of the best tables, right in the center of the dining room where everyone could see and be seen. I watched on the kitchen monitor as they settled in. Richard was performing. That's the only word for it. Gesturing broadly, laughing too loud, touching one of the men on the shoulder like they were old friends. I recognized the behavior. He was hunting. These were potential investors, people he needed to impress. He had no idea whose restaurant he was sitting in. Our sommelier, David, brought them the wine list. I saw Richard order without looking at the prices, another performance. Look how comfortable I am with luxury. Look how much I belong here. It would have made me angry once. Now it just made me tired. I plated 3 of our signature desserts, the burnt honey panna cotta with lavender shortbread, and brought them to table 7 myself. The couple there were regulars, sweet, and they lit up when they saw me. We chatted for a moment about their upcoming anniversary. I could feel Richard's table in my peripheral vision, but he hadn't noticed me yet. That's when Laurent found me near the server station. He just snapped his fingers at Jenna. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Jenna was one of our best servers, a grad student putting herself through a master's program in social work. She was professional and smart and kind, and she deserved better than being snapped at like a dog. "I'm bringing them bread," I said. Laurent looked at me. "You don't have to." "I know." I picked up the bread basket. We made our focaccia in-house, rosemary and sea salt, still warm. The smell of it alone was enough to make you hungry. I took a breath, and I walked across the dining room to table 12. Richard didn't see me at first. He was mid-sentence, telling some story, his hands moving. I set the basket down gently and greeted them the way I'd greeted 1,000 tables. "Good evening. Here's our house focaccia just out of the oven. Can I get you anything else right now?" Richard glanced up. I watched him see me, really see me for maybe the first time in years. His face went through several expressions at once. Surprise, confusion, and then, because he's Richard, amusement. "Maya," he said my name like a question. "What are you doing here? Do you work here?" "I do," I said, calm, neutral. And that's when he turned to his guests and said it. Just a waitress. The words I'd heard in a dozen different ways for a dozen different years. The words that carried the weight of every family dinner, every dismissive comment, every time he'd looked at my life and found it small. And that's when Laurent appeared. But you need to understand why those words hit the way they did. You need to understand where they came from, so let me take you back. Not 3 hours this time, 16 years. I was 16 when my dad died. He was 41, a work accident. He was an HVAC technician, the kind of guy who could fix anything, who took pride in showing up on time and doing the job right. He'd been on a roof in July, a commercial building, when he collapsed. Heat stroke, they said later. By the time the ambulance got there, it was too late. My mom was a cafeteria manager at the elementary school. Between the two of them, we'd had enough. Not a lot, but enough. We lived in a small house with a yard. I played soccer. We went to the lake in the summer. It was a good life, a simple life. And Richard hated it. My dad was his younger brother, and Richard had always treated that 7-year age gap like a canyon. Richard had gone into commercial real estate, worked his way up, married Diane who came from money, had 2 kids he sent to private school. He drove a Lexus. He belonged to a country club, and he looked at my dad, his younger brother who worked with his hands and came home smelling like machine oil in summer heat, like he was a problem to be solved. After my dad died, Richard stepped in. That's how he phrased it. Stepped in, like we were a mess he had to clean up. He paid for part of my community college tuition, which I'm grateful for, I am, but he never let me forget it. Every check came with a lecture. Every semester came with a reminder that this was charity, that I needed to be smart about my future, that I needed to make different choices than my parents had. He never said my dad's choices were wrong out loud. He didn't have to. It was in every sigh, every raised eyebrow, every comment about stability and planning and being realistic. When I told him I wanted to go to culinary school, he laughed. Actually laughed. We were at his house for Christmas. I was 19. I'd been working at a diner for 2 years, saving every penny, and I'd finally gotten the courage to say it out loud. I wanted to study food. I wanted to work in restaurants, maybe own one someday. Richard put down his wine glass and looked at me like, I just said I wanted to join the circus. Sweetheart, he said, restaurants fail. It's one of the riskiest businesses there is. You'd be throwing money away. He leaned back in his chair, settling into lecture mode. Now, if you want a real career, I could get you an admin position at my firm. Entry-level, but it's stable, benefits. You could work your way up. I tried to explain. I told him I was good at it, that I'd been promoted to lead server, that my manager said I had instincts. Richard waved it off. You're young. You think you're good at it because you haven't seen what else is out there. Trust me on this. My cousin Bryce, Richard's son, was there too. He was in college then, business major, already working part-time at Richard's firm. He smirked into his drink and said, I mean, do you really want to be taking orders from people your whole life? I didn't know how to explain that I didn't see it that way. That hospitality felt like a craft, like something worth learning. That I loved the rhythm of a dinner rush, the way a good team moved like a single organism, the look on someone's face when you got their meal exactly right. So I didn't explain. I just nodded and said I'd think about it. But the moment that really broke something in me came 2 years later. Thanksgiving. I was 21. I'd been taking night classes, hospitality management, still working full-time. I'd saved almost $15,000. I was proud of it. I thought maybe, for once, Richard would see that I was serious, that I was building something. My mom told him, I don't know why. Maybe she thought he'd be impressed. Maybe she thought it would get him off my back. Richard's response was to corner me in the kitchen while I was helping with dishes. Your mom says you've been saving money. Yeah, I said. I'm hoping to invest in the restaurant where I work. The owner's looking for a partner on a small expansion. He stared at me, then he shook his head, slow. Like he was dealing with a child who just wouldn't learn. Maya, listen to me. Your dad was a good man. I loved him. But let's be honest, he never understood money. He worked hard, but he never built anything. He never thought strategically. He put his hand on my shoulder heavy. I don't want you to repeat his mistakes. You're a smart girl, but you don't know what you don't know. Stick to something simple, something you can actually handle. Something simple. Like my dreams were too big for someone like me. Like ambition was something I hadn't earned. I went home that night and cried in my car for 20 minutes. Then I wiped my face, drove to the ATM, and checked my balance. $15,342. Every single dollar earned, saved, mine. And I made a decision right there. I wasn't going to try to convince Richard anymore. I wasn't going to explain or justify or ask for his approval. I was going to build something so undeniable that his opinion wouldn't matter. Not because I wanted to prove him wrong, but because I needed to prove to myself that I was right. I invested the money. Not in that first restaurant, the expansion fell through, but I kept saving. I kept working. I moved from the diner to a better restaurant, a mid-tier Italian place with white tablecloths and a wine list. I was good at it. Better than good. I could read a table within 30 seconds of greeting them. I knew who wanted to be left alone and who wanted to chat. I knew when to upsell and when to back off. I knew how to turn a complaint into a loyal customer and a good night into a great memory. I started taking night classes, hospitality management first, then basic accounting. I wanted to understand the bones of the business, not just the front of house polish. I lived with 2 roommates in an apartment where the heat didn't always work. I didn't go on vacation. I didn't buy new clothes unless the old ones literally fell apart. Every dollar that wasn't rent or food went into savings. Richard found out I was taking business classes. I don't know how. Family gossip, probably. My mom trying to make conversation at some gathering I'd skipped. He called her. She told me about it later, apologetic and anxious in that way she'd gotten since Dad died. Like she was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Richard thinks you should let him set you up with his financial advisor, she said. He says you're being stubborn. He could get you a job at his firm, Maya. Receptionist to start, but it's stable. Benefits. Why won't you just consider it? Because I didn't want stability. Not his version of it, anyway. I wanted to build something. But I didn't say that. I just told her I was fine, that I had a plan, and I changed the subject. A month later, Richard showed up at the restaurant. I was in the middle of a Friday night shift, running on pure adrenaline and muscle memory, when I saw him walk in with Aunt Diane. They didn't have a reservation, but we squeezed them in because that's what you do. I wasn't their server, thank God, but I was in the section, so I saw them. Richard didn't acknowledge me. Not a wave, not a nod. I might as well have been part of the furniture. They ordered expensive. 2 appetizers, entrees, a bottle of wine that cost more than I made in a night. I watched their server, Marcus, take care of them. Professional, attentive, everything right. At the end of the night, after they left, Marcus came into the server station and tossed something on the counter. A business card. Richard's business card. On the back in his handwriting, when you're ready to be serious. He left this with a $5 tip, Marcus said, on a $200 check, said to make sure you got it. $5. I stood there holding that card, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not sadness, not even anger, really, just clarity. His help was never help. It was control. Every offer, every piece of advice, every lecture about being realistic, it was all designed to keep me small, keep me grateful, keep me in a place where he could look down and feel good about himself for lifting me up. I kept the card. I don't know why. Maybe as a reminder, maybe as evidence. I put it in a drawer at home with my savings account statements and my class syllabi and every other piece of proof that I was building something, even if he couldn't see it. I started setting boundaries after that, small ones at first. I stopped going to every family dinner. When I did go, I kept my answers vague. Work is good. Yeah, still in restaurants. Thanks for asking. I stopped telling my mom details she might accidentally share. I started building a wall between the life I was creating and the family that couldn't understand it. It felt lonely sometimes, but it also felt necessary. The years added up. 22, 23, 24. I moved to a better restaurant, a French bistro with a real chef and a kitchen that cared about craft. I wasn't just serving anymore. I was learning. The chef, a woman named Anne, started teaching me about sourcing, about seasonal menus, about the difference between a restaurant that survives and one that thrives. When I was 25, Anne offered me a tiny stake in the restaurant, 5% for $20,000. It was more than I'd ever spent on anything in my life. It was terrifying. I said yes. I liquidated most of my savings, signed the papers, and became a part owner. It was the proudest moment of my life up to that point. I had equity. I had skin in the game. I was building something real. And I didn't tell anyone in my family except my mom. I made her promise not to say anything. I told her I wanted to wait until it was more established, until I had something concrete to show. Really, I just didn't want to hear Richard's opinion. That worked for about 6 months. Then came Thanksgiving. I was 26. The restaurant stake had grown, the value had gone up, and Anne was talking about opening a second location. She wanted to bring me in on the planning. I'd been taking more business classes, I understood P&L statements, I knew how to read a lease. I was good at this. I knew I was good at this. And I was excited. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe I could tell my family something and they'd be proud. Maybe they'd finally see what I'd been building. So at Thanksgiving dinner, at Richard's house with the vaulted ceilings and the catered sides and the table that sat 12, I mentioned it. We were between the turkey and the pie. Everyone was full and lazy and comfortable. Bryce was talking about some deal he'd closed at Richard's firm. Diane was asking my mom about her holiday plans. It felt safe. I actually have some good news, I said. My voice sounded too loud. Everyone looked at me. The restaurant where I work, the chef is opening a second location. She's asked me to invest. I'm going to be a partner. My mom smiled, genuine and warm. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. Richard put down his wine glass. Partner, he repeated. What does that mean exactly? It means I'm buying in. Equity. I'll help manage the new location, handle some of the operations. How much? Bryce asked. Excuse me. How much are you investing? I hesitated. 40,000. The silence that followed felt like falling. Then Richard laughed, not a polite chuckle, a full, genuine laugh like I'd told the funniest joke he'd heard all year. Sweetheart, he said, wiping his eyes, restaurants fail, we've talked about this. You'll lose everything, all that money you've been saving just gone. He shook his head, still smiling. If you want to invest, really invest, I'll set you up with a proper financial advisor. Someone who can put that money somewhere safe. But throwing it at a restaurant, that's not investing, that's gambling. Diane nodded along. He's right, honey, it's so risky. Bryce leaned back in his chair, looking at me with something like pity. Aren't you like a waitress? How do you even have $40,000? The implication was clear. Either I was lying, or I was bad with money, or I'd gotten it somehow I shouldn't have. The idea that I'd earned it, saved it, built it dollar by dollar over 8 years didn't even seem to occur to him. I saved it, I said quietly. Right, but, Bryce gestured vaguely. That's a lot of money to just throw away. Uncle Richard could actually help you, you know, he knows people. Richard nodded, settling into the role of benevolent advisor. Look, I know you're passionate about this, I respect that, but passion doesn't pay bills, you need to be smart, strategic. This chef, does she even have a real business plan? Do you know the failure rate for new restaurants? It's over 60% in the first year. She has a plan, I said. I've seen it, I've helped write parts of it. Maya, Richard's voice went soft, the way you'd talk to a confused child. You don't have the experience to evaluate something like this. You just don't. That's not an insult, it's a fact. You've worked in restaurants, you haven't run one. There's a difference. My mom shifted uncomfortably. She looked at me, then at Richard, caught in the middle like always. Maybe you should just think about it a little longer, she said quietly. I looked around the table. At Richard, so certain of his own authority. At Bryce, smug and dismissive. At Diane, nodding along. At my mom, who loved me but couldn't defend me. At the empty chair where my dad should have been, the dad who'd worked with his hands and died on a roof and apparently taught me nothing useful about the world. I stood up, carefully placed my napkin on the table. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "I need to go." "Maya, don't be dramatic," Richard said. "I'm not. I just need to leave." I walked out, got in my car, drove 3 blocks, pulled over. And then I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, shaking with something that wasn't sadness and wasn't quite anger. It was bigger than that, colder. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. $42,618, right there, real, mine. I'd earned every single cent. I'd worked doubles and triples. I'd covered shifts when I had the flu. I'd smiled through harassment and bad tips and kitchen burns. I'd studied after closing, done homework in empty dining rooms at 2 in the morning. I'd made 1,000 tiny sacrifices that Richard would never see and couldn't understand. And he thought I was too stupid to know what to do with it. No, not stupid. He'd never say stupid. He'd say inexperienced, naive, unrealistic. All the polite words that meant the same thing: you're not capable. I made a decision right then, in my car, shaking and furious and suddenly crystalline clear. I was going to do it anyway. I was going to invest. I was going to succeed. And I was going to do it so completely, so undeniably, that Richard would choke on his own condescension. Not for revenge, not to prove him wrong, but to prove to myself that I was right, that my instincts mattered, that my father's work ethic and my mother's resilience and my own stubborn competence were worth more than Richard's dismissive certainty. I invested the $40,000. Anne and I opened the second location. I worked 100-hour weeks for 6 months straight. I learned everything. Scheduling, inventory, vendor negotiations, health inspections, staff conflicts, broken equipment, difficult customers, and 1,000 tiny fires that needed putting out every single day. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The restaurant succeeded. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily, sustainably, profitably. Within 18 months, my stake had doubled in value. Anne started asking my opinion on major decisions. I was good at the operations side, the systems and processes that kept everything running smoothly. I had a head for numbers and people, and it turned out those 2 things were 90% of the business. I kept taking classes: business finance, marketing, contract law. I went back and got my bachelor's degree online, 1 class at a time while working full-time. It took me 3 years. I didn't go to the graduation. I just downloaded the diploma and put it in a folder. I stopped going to most family events. I told my mom I was busy, which was true. I told her work was going well, which was also true. I didn't give details. Richard called once, left a message saying he hoped I hadn't made a huge mistake and it wasn't too late to cut my losses. I deleted it. I built my life in silence, and it was a good life. When I was 29, I went to a food and wine festival downtown. It was a networking thing, industry people, chefs and owners and vendors. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I just wanted to see what was out there, taste some good food, maybe make some contacts. That's where I met Laurent. He was doing a demo, this tall, quiet guy with salt and pepper hair and hands that moved with absolute precision. He was making a duck confit, talking about sourcing and sustainability and the way French technique could adapt to local ingredients. I watched the whole thing. When he finished, I went up and introduced myself. We started talking. It was supposed to be a 5-minute conversation. It turned into 3 hours. We got coffee, then dinner. Not romantic, just 2 people who spoke the same language. He'd worked in Michelin-starred restaurants in Lyon and New York. He was a James Beard nominee. He was planning to open his own place and he wanted it to be different. Not just good food, but a real partnership model. Sustainable. Ethical. A place where the staff were treated like professionals and the food was ambitious but not pretentious. He talked about his vision. I talked about operations. He asked about my background. I told him about Anne's restaurant, about my stake, about the systems I'd built. I showed him photos of the inventory tracking app I'd designed, the staff scheduling matrix, the vendor comparison spreadsheets. He looked at me differently after that, not like I was a waitress who'd gotten lucky, like I was someone who knew what they were doing. We met 6 more times over the next 2 months. Coffee meetings turned into business meetings. He showed me his plans, a farm-to-table concept, ambitious but achievable, with a clear path to Michelin consideration within 3 years. He had the culinary vision. He needed someone who could handle everything else. "I'm looking for a partner," he said finally. "Not an investor, not an employee. An actual partner. Someone who understands the operations side as well as I understand the kitchen." "What kind of partnership?" 40% for you, 60 for me. You'd need to bring 150,000, cash and sweat equity. You'd run front of house, vendor relations, staffing, marketing, finances. I'd run the kitchen and menu development. Major decisions we make together. $150,000. I'd never had that much money in my life, but I had the stake in Anne's restaurant which I could sell. I had savings. I had good credit. I could get a loan for the rest. It was terrifying. It was everything I'd been working toward. "Can I see the full business plan?" I asked. He smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask that." I spent 2 weeks going over every detail. The lease terms, the build-out costs, the projected revenue, the staffing model, the marketing plan. I ran the numbers 6 different ways. I consulted with Anne, who was supportive and sad to lose me but understood. I talked to a lawyer. I talked to an accountant. The numbers worked. More than worked. If we executed even 70% as well as the plan projected, we'd be profitable within 18 months. I said yes. I sold my stake in Anne's restaurant. I took out a loan for $60,000. I signed the partnership agreement on a Tuesday afternoon in a lawyer's office that smelled like old books and coffee. Laurent and I shook hands. We were doing this. I told my mom, made her swear not to tell Richard. Not yet. Not until we opened. Not until it was real enough that his opinion couldn't touch it. We spent 8 months building Hartley and Rye. The name was a combination of my middle name and his mother's maiden name. The space was a converted warehouse with exposed brick and huge windows. We built the kitchen from scratch. I negotiated every vendor contract, hired every server, designed the reservation system, wrote the training manual. Laurent built a menu that made me want to cry. It was so good. Simple ingredients, perfect technique, everything seasonal and local and exactly right. We opened on a Wednesday in April. Soft opening, just friends and family and industry people. My mom came. She sat at the bar and cried happy tears and told me my dad would have been so proud. Richard didn't come. I didn't invite him. The reviews started coming in after the first month. Good reviews, then great ones. The local magazine did a feature, then a food blog, then Eater. Within 6 months, we were booked solid 2 weeks out. Within a year, we were in the black. Within 18 months, people were talking about Michelin stars. I kept my head down and worked. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't send updates to the family. When I saw my mom, I told her things were good, and I left it at that. At family gatherings, the few I went to, I was vague. I work in hospitality management. Yeah, still in the restaurant industry. If someone asked where, I'd name a different restaurant, one I'd worked at years ago, and change the subject. I wasn't hiding. I just wasn't performing, and there's a difference. Richard never asked for details. To him, I was still just a waitress. Maybe a manager now if he thought about it at all, but definitely not someone whose career deserved real curiosity. That was fine. I didn't need his curiosity. I didn't need his approval. I'd stopped needing it somewhere between the $5 tip and the night I'd driven away from his Thanksgiving table. I had built something real, something mine, something good. And then, 3 years after we opened, Richard made a reservation at my restaurant. He had no idea it was mine. And I had a choice to make about what to do with that. The business grew, not explosively but steadily, the kind of sustainable growth that comes from doing things right over and over again. We got written up in more magazines. Food bloggers came in and posted photos that got thousands of likes. Laurent got nominated for a James Beard Award in the Best Chef category. We didn't win, but the nomination alone changed things. Suddenly, we weren't just a good local restaurant. We were a destination. I started getting calls from a restaurant group out of Chicago. They wanted to talk about investment, about partnerships, about possibly opening a Hartley and Rye in other cities. I took the meetings. I listened. I didn't commit to anything, but I learned how those conversations worked, what our restaurant was worth to people who thought in terms of portfolios and markets. We started seriously looking at a second location. There was a space in the Arts District, smaller than our flagship but with good bones. The lease terms were favorable. Laurent and I spent weeks running numbers, trying to figure out if we could split our attention without sacrificing quality. It was the kind of problem I'd dreamed of having. My LinkedIn profile was public. It listed my title clearly, co-owner and director of operations, Hartley and Rye. There were articles about the restaurant that mentioned me by name, press photos from events. None of it was hidden. Anyone who cared to look could have found it in 30 seconds. Richard never looked. I knew this because at the family events I did attend, maybe 3 or 4 a year, he still introduced me the same way. My niece Maya, she works in restaurants. Like it was a phase. Like I was still waiting tables and spinning my wheels and would eventually come to my senses. When people asked me directly what I did, I kept it vague. Hospitality management was my go-to answer. Technically true, functionally meaningless. If someone pressed for details, I'd say I worked at a restaurant downtown and change the subject. My mom almost slipped once. We were at a cousin's graduation party, and someone asked her if she was proud of me. She lit up, started to say something about the restaurant, about the reviews, and I caught her eye. She course-corrected mid-sentence, said something generic about me working hard. Later, in the car, she asked me why I didn't just tell everyone. "Because it's mine," I said, "and I don't want his opinion on it." She didn't ask again. I started hearing things through the family grapevine. Richard's business was having problems. Nothing catastrophic, but there'd been a deal that fell through. Something about a development project that lost financing. He was courting new investors, trying to make up ground. Bryce let it slip at some gathering that Richard was stressed, that things were tight. It surprised me, hearing that. Richard had always seemed so solid, so certain. But I was starting to understand something about him that I hadn't seen when I was younger. His confidence was performance. His authority was volume. And underneath all of it, he was more fragile than he looked. I didn't take pleasure in that knowledge. It just made me sad. Sad for him, sad for the years I'd spent trying to earn the approval of someone who needed to keep me small so he could feel big. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, the reservation came through. I was in the office, reviewing the draft menu for a private event when I saw the notification. Richard Ashford, party of 4, Friday, 8 p.m. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I called Laurent into the office. "He booked a table," I said, turning the monitor so he could see. Laurent read the name, then looked at me. "Does he know?" "No." "Are you going to tell him?" I thought about it. I could call him, send a text, let him know before he showed up. It would be the gracious thing to do, the mature thing. "No," I said, "I don't think I am." Laurent sat down across from me. "What do you want to happen?" "I don't know. I just know I'm tired of making myself smaller so he can feel comfortable." He nodded slowly. "So we don't hide anything. If he asks, we tell the truth. If he makes a scene, we handle it professionally. But we don't pretend you're not a partner in your own restaurant." "Yeah," I said, "that sounds right." We confirmed the reservation. I didn't cancel it, didn't move it to a weird time slot, didn't do anything that would tip him off. I just let it sit there on the books like any other table. And I waited. 2 weeks before the reservation, there was a birthday party for Aunt Diane. My mom had been asking me to come for weeks, and I'd run out of excuses, so I went. It was at their house, the same house where I'd sat at Thanksgiving 6 years earlier and been laughed at for wanting to invest. The house looked the same. Vaulted ceilings, marble countertops, everything expensive and tasteful and just a little cold. Richard was holding court in the living room when I arrived, talking to some couple I didn't recognize. Diane's friends, probably. When he saw me, he waved me over with that big, performative warmth he used when there were witnesses. Maya, come here, I want you to meet Gerald and Patricia. I walked over, shook their hands, smiled politely. This is my niece, Richard said, his hand landing on my shoulder in that way that was supposed to look affectionate but felt like ownership. She works in food service. We keep hoping she'll get serious about her career, but... He trailed off with a laugh and a shrug. You know how it is. Gerald and Patricia smiled awkwardly. Patricia, trying to be kind, turned to me. What do you do exactly? I'm a co-owner of a restaurant, I said, calm, simple, true. Richard laughed, actually laughed. She's being modest. She waits tables. Well, I think she's management now, right, Maya, but same industry. I looked at him, really looked at him. He believed what he was saying, completely. It wasn't even malicious. He'd decided years ago who I was, and he'd never bothered to update the information. Think what you like, Uncle Richard, I said quietly. He patted my shoulder again, already turning back to Gerald to talk about something else. The subject of my sad little career was closed. I excused myself, got a drink from the kitchen, spent the rest of the party talking to my mom and a few cousins I actually liked. I left early. Richard probably didn't notice. What I didn't know until later was that Patricia, curious or maybe just bored, had Googled me that night. Googled Hartley and Rye, found our website, found the Our Team page with my photo and title, partner and director of operations. She'd pulled Diane aside the next day at their book club. I thought you said Maya was just starting out in her career. Diane, flustered, said she didn't know what Patricia was talking about. She owns a restaurant, a very successful restaurant, apparently. It was just written up in that food magazine my daughter reads. Word started to spread after that, quietly through the family network. My cousins heard, some aunts and uncles. There were questions in the family group chat that I ignored. My mom fielded calls asking if it was true, if I really owned a restaurant, why hadn't I said anything? But Richard, insulated by his own certainty and too busy with his own problems to pay attention to family gossip, didn't hear any of it. The week of the reservation, things got worse for him. I know because the family text chain got more active. Richard sent a group message on Tuesday asking if anyone had recommendations for upscale restaurants that would impress serious investors. Need somewhere that screams success, he wrote. Important dinner Friday night. Bryce responded almost immediately. Hartley and Rye, it's that farm-to-table place everyone's talking about. Supposed to be incredible. Might be hard to get a reservation, though. Got one already, Richard wrote back. 8 p.m. Friday, good call. I read the exchange on my phone, standing in the walk-in cooler doing inventory, and felt something cold and certain settle in my chest. He still didn't know. The day before the reservation, Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with a text. From Richard. We almost never texted. I almost didn't open it. Taking some investors to an important dinner tomorrow night. If you're free, maybe don't come by, don't want any awkwardness. I read it 3 times, trying to figure out what he meant. Did he think there was a family event happening that I might crash? Did he think I'd somehow show up at his business dinner? The phrasing was so odd, so dismissive, like my mere presence in his vicinity was a problem to be managed. I screenshotted it, sent it to Laurent with no comment. He called me immediately. Are you seeing this? Yeah. What does he think is going to happen? I don't know. I think he just doesn't want to run into me, like I'm an embarrassment. Laurent was quiet for a moment. Then, if he disrespects you in my dining room tomorrow night, I'm setting the record straight. I need you to know that. Okay, I said. I mean it, Maya. This is your restaurant. You don't have to hide that from anyone, especially not him. I know. Do you want me to call him? Tell him before he shows up? I thought about it. It would be kinder. It would avoid a scene. It would be the bigger person thing to do. No, I said. Let it play out. I texted Richard back, keeping it simple. I'll be working tomorrow night. Hope it goes well. He didn't respond. He probably didn't even register what I'd said. He'd told me not to come by. I'd agreed. End of story in his mind. Friday morning, I came in early. We had prep work and a full book, and I wanted everything perfect. Not because of Richard, because that's how we ran every service. But I also printed 2 things from my office. The partnership agreement, with both our signatures and the notary seal. And the most recent revenue report, showing 18 months of consistent profit and a valuation that would have made 26-year-old me weep with relief. I put them in a folder and slid the folder into my desk drawer. I didn't plan to use them, didn't plan to wave them in his face or make some dramatic speech, but I wanted them close. Wanted to know that if he pushed, if he tried to diminish me in front of his investors or my own staff, I had proof. Not that I needed to prove anything, but old wounds run deep, and I guess some part of me still wanted the receipts. Laurent found me in the office around 3, before the dinner service started ramping up. "You ready for tonight?" he asked. "I don't know what I am," I said honestly. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You know what I see when I look at you." I shook my head. Someone who took every disadvantage, every person who told her she couldn't, and turned it into fuel. You didn't just succeed in spite of him. You succeeded because you knew exactly what you were working for. That's rare. "I just didn't want him to be right," I said quietly. "He was never right. He was just loud. There's a difference." I nodded. My throat felt tight. "Whatever happens tonight," Laurent said, "you don't owe him anything. Not an explanation, not a performance, not your silence. You hear me?" "Yeah," I said, "I hear you." At 7:30, I changed into my chef's whites. I wasn't scheduled to work the floor, but I wanted to be visible. Wanted to be exactly who I was, partner, operator, co-owner. If Richard saw me, fine. If he didn't, also fine. I wasn't hiding anymore. At 7:55, I watched on the kitchen monitor as the host led Richard and his party to table 12. He looked good. Expensive suit, confident walk, that big smile he used when he was selling something. I took a breath. And I got ready for whatever came next. Richard's voice carried across the dining room. That's the thing about him, he's always been loud. Not in an obnoxious way, just in that practiced confidence that comes from years of being listened to. He was telling some story, gesturing with his wine glass, and his 3 companions were leaning in, laughing at the right moments. I was in the kitchen, standing at the pass where Laurent was plating appetizers. The monitor showed table 12 clearly. I could see Richard's profile, the way he touched one of the men on the arm to emphasize a point. Classic Richard. Everything was a performance. "He's really working them," Laurent murmured next to me. "That's what he does." Our sommelier, David, had just brought them the wine list. I watched Richard take it, barely glance at it, and point to something in the upper price range. The sommelier nodded, professional and attentive. Richard handed the list back and said something that made the table laugh. I recognized the man sitting to Richard's left. Silver hair, expensive watch. I'd seen his photo in the business journal. A commercial real estate investor, the kind of person Richard needed to impress. The 4th person at the table was Bryce. Of course, being groomed, learning how to court investors by watching his father work. Jenna, one of our best servers, approached the table with water. She was smiling, warm, about to do her greeting when Richard held up one hand without looking at her, then snapped his fingers twice, pointed at his water glass. Jenna's smile didn't falter, but I saw her shoulders tighten. She filled his glass, greeted the table properly, and walked away. When she got back to the server station, I saw her take a breath and shake it off. Laurent saw it too. He looked at me. That's twice now. First the snap, then he cut her off mid-greeting. I felt something go cold and sharp in my chest. The same feeling I'd had when I found that business card with the $5 tip. Richard didn't see servers as people. He never had. We were props in his performance, part of the scenery. "I'm bringing them bread," I said. Laurent studied my face. "You sure?" "Yeah." I wasn't angry. That's the thing. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I was just done. Done hiding, done managing his ego, done making myself invisible so he could feel important. I picked up one of our bread baskets. The focaccia was still warm, rosemary and sea salt, the smell of it rich and yeasty. I'd helped develop this recipe with Laurent 2 years ago. We'd tested 7 versions before we got it exactly right. I walked across the dining room. The dinner service was in full swing around me. Conversations and laughter, the clink of silverware on plates, the low music we played that was just loud enough to fill the silence but quiet enough not to intrude. This was my place. These were my tables, my staff, my restaurant. I reached table 12 and set the basket down gently in the center. "Good evening, gentlemen. This is our house focaccia just out of the oven. Can I get you anything else right now?" Richard glanced up. I watched his brain process what he was seeing. Recognition came in stages. First, just a face that seemed familiar. Then the context clicking into place. Then confusion. "Maya," he said my name like a question. "What are you doing here?" "I work here," I said, calm, neutral, stating a fact. The silver-haired investor looked at me with polite interest. Bryce stared at his phone. The third man, younger, in a suit that was trying too hard, glanced between Richard and me like he was trying to figure out the dynamic. Richard recovered quickly. He always did. That's his skill, the ability to spin anything into a story that makes him look good. He turned to his companions with a chuckle and gestured at me. "This is my niece, Maya." He was smiling, doing that thing where he made it seem like he was letting them in on a secret. "Just a waitress. Sweet girl, but no ambition, you know? I keep telling her to come work for me, get a real career going, but—" He shrugged, affectionate and condescending all at once. "Just a waitress." The words hung in the air. The silver-haired investor looked uncomfortable. The younger guy smiled awkwardly. Bryce finally looked up from his phone, smirking. I felt it land. That old familiar ache, the one I thought I'd gotten rid of. Except this time it was different. This time it wasn't shame. It was something else. Clarity, maybe, or just the final death of the need for his approval. I opened my mouth. I wasn't sure what I was going to say. Maybe nothing. Maybe just enjoy your meal and walk away with my dignity intact. That's when I heard Laurent's voice behind me. "Partner." I turned. Laurent was walking toward the table, smiling that professional smile he used with guests, the one that was warm but also clearly in control. He was in his full chef's whites, tall and solid, and he moved through the dining room like he owned it, which 60% speaking he did. He reached the table and extended his hand to Richard. "Mr. Ashford, welcome to Hartley and Rye. I'm Chef Laurent Beaumont." Richard stood slightly, shook his hand, suddenly trying to match Laurent's authority. "Chef, yes, wonderful to meet you. Really exceptional food, I was just telling my colleagues here." "I'm so glad you're enjoying everything." Laurent's smile didn't waver. Then he turned to me. "Maya, sorry to interrupt your service, but we need you to approve the new investor contracts before Saturday. I have them in the office when you have a moment." The world seemed to slow down. I watched Richard's face. The confident smile was still there, but his eyes were confused. Laurent continued, seamless, like he was just discussing normal business. "Also, the Times confirmed. They want to do the interview about the expansion next Friday. I told them you'd call to set up a time. Does late morning work for you?" Richard's smile faltered. His hand, which had been reaching for his wine glass, stopped halfway. "Partner," Richard said, the word came out strange, uncertain. Laurent looked genuinely surprised. He glanced at me, then back at Richard. "Yes, Maya owns 40% of Hartley and Rye. She's been my business partner since before we opened." He paused, and I could see him registering Richard's expression. "You didn't know." The silence at the table was stunning. The silver-haired investor was staring at me now, his expression completely changed. He leaned forward slightly. "Wait, Maya Hartwell, you're the one who designed the staff partnership model, aren't you? I read about that in the profile." "The eater profile, yes," I said quietly. The investor's whole demeanor shifted. He looked at me the way people look at someone they want to talk to, not through. "That was really impressive. The way you structured the profit sharing with the kitchen staff. We've been trying to figure out how to do something similar in our hospitality division." Richard was still frozen. His mouth opened, closed. He looked at Laurent, then at me, then at the investor who was now completely ignoring him. Richard started. His voice sounded thin. "She never mentioned, I didn't realize." Bryce had put his phone down. He was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Laurent, gracious as ever, smiled at Richard. "Well, Maya's humble about her accomplishments, but yes, she's been instrumental in everything we've built here. The operations, the vendor relationships, the expansion plans. I couldn't have done any of this without her." He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Because to him it was. The younger investor pulled out his phone. I could see him typing my name into Google. His eyebrows went up as he read. Richard tried to laugh. It came out wrong, strangled. "Well, she never really explained the full scope, I thought." He trailed off. There was nowhere good for that sentence to go. I looked at my uncle, really looked at him, and I saw him clearly, maybe for the first time. He wasn't a giant. He wasn't some authority whose approval I needed. He was just a man who'd mistaken volume for wisdom, who'd confused his own success with the right to diminish other people's. And right now, in front of the people he'd brought here to impress, he was small. "You never asked," I said quietly. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't even angry, it was just true. The silver-haired investor was still looking at me. "Do you have a card? I'd love to talk to you about our hotel-restaurant group. We're restructuring our management approach, and I think your model might be exactly what we need." I nodded. "Of course, I can have someone bring you one." Laurent touched my elbow gently. "I'll let you get back to your guests. Mr. Ashford, enjoy your dinner. You're in excellent hands here." He meant Jenna, our server, but the words landed differently in context. We walked away together. I could feel Richard's eyes on my back, could feel the awkward silence we'd left at that table. When we got back to the kitchen, Laurent squeezed my shoulder. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, and I was. My hands were shaking slightly adrenaline, but I felt clear. Light almost. "He's going to lose that investor meeting," Laurent said. "I know." "You didn't plan that." "No, but I'm not sorry about it either." Through the kitchen monitor, I watched table 12. The silver-haired investor had turned his chair slightly, away from Richard, and was scrolling through his phone, probably reading about the restaurant, about me. The younger investor was doing the same. Bryce looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Richard was trying to get the conversation back on track. I could see him talking, gesturing, attempting to reclaim control. But the energy had shifted. The men he'd brought here to impress were more interested in the restaurant, in the partner he'd just called just a waitress, than they were in whatever deal he was selling. Jenna came back to check on them. This time when she approached, the silver-haired investor stood slightly, politely, and asked her a question about the menu. She answered, professional and knowledgeable, and he thanked her. Richard sat back in his chair. He looked defeated. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, something big and satisfying. Instead, I just felt tired, and a little sad, because it didn't have to be this way. He could have asked any time in the last 10 years what I was really doing, who I really was. He could have been curious instead of certain. But he hadn't, and that was his loss, not mine. The silver-haired investor got up 15 minutes later and walked toward the kitchen. Our host intercepted him, and he asked to speak to me. I went out to the small private area near the bar. "Ms. Hartwell, I'm James Chen. I apologize for the awkwardness back there." He handed me his card. "I meant what I said. We're looking at restructuring 5 hotel restaurants in the next 18 months. I'd love to discuss your approach. Would you be open to a meeting?" I looked at the card. James Chen, Senior VP of Hospitality Development, a company I'd heard of, a real opportunity. "I'd be very interested," I said. We shook hands. He went back to the table. 10 minutes later, Richard asked for the check. They left before their entrees arrived. Richard paid, over-tipped in that performative way he did when he was trying to save face, and walked out without looking toward the kitchen. Bryce followed him, scrolling his phone. The two investors stayed for another drink at the bar. James Chen left his number with our host and asked me to call him next week. After they left, I stood in the dining room for a moment. The service continued around me. Other tables, other guests, the rhythm of a Friday night. Everything exactly as it should be. Laurent came out of the kitchen and stood next to me. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like something just ended," I said. "Yeah," he said, "it did." The next morning, I woke up to 17 text messages. The family group chat had exploded. Someone, probably Bryce, had told everyone what happened. The messages ranged from confused to congratulatory to defensive. "My cousin Sarah, wait, you own Hartley and Rye. That place is impossible to get into." Another cousin, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" An aunt, "So proud of you, sweetie." And then, buried in the middle from Diane, "Richard is very upset. He says you embarrassed him on purpose. That wasn't very kind, Maya." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I typed, "I was working, he made an assumption." I didn't send anything else to the group chat. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. My mom. "Hi, honey." Her voice was careful. "I heard about last night." "Yeah." "Richard called me this morning. He's really hurt. He said you set him up, that you knew he was coming and you planned to humiliate him." I sat down on my couch, still in my pajamas, and felt the tiredness wash over me again. "Mom, I didn't plan anything. He made a reservation, I took it. He insulted me in front of his business partners. Laurent told him the truth. That's all that happened. He said he would have been supportive if you'd just told him properly." "I did tell him. I told the whole family at Thanksgiving 6 years ago. He laughed at me. Do you remember that?" She was quiet. "Mom, I love you, but I'm not responsible for managing his ego. He spent 16 years telling me I wasn't good enough, that I didn't understand business, that I should give up on my dreams and work for him. He left a $5 tip at my restaurant once with a note telling me to get serious. He called me just a waitress in front of people I do business with. I don't owe him comfort." "I know he's been hard on you," she said quietly, "but he's family. Can't you just call him, smooth things over?" "No," I said, "I can't, not this time." She sighed. "He's your father's brother, Maya. Dad would never have treated someone the way Richard treated me. You know that." She didn't argue, because it was true. "I have to go, Mom. I'll call you later this week." After we hung up, I opened my personal messages. There was one from Bryce, sent at 2 in the morning. "Why didn't you just tell us?" I typed back, "I did. No one believed me, and after a while I stopped needing you to." Then there was a message from a number I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made me open it. "Maya, it's Richard. We need to talk. I would have supported your business venture if you'd told me properly. There's no need for this hostility. Call me." I read it 3 times. Then I deleted it. I didn't block him. I just deleted the message and put my phone down. Laurent texted around noon. "James Chen called the restaurant looking for you. I gave him your cell. Hope that's okay." "More than okay, thanks. How are you doing?" "Good, I think. Weird, but good." "You were remarkable last night. Just wanted you to know that." I smiled at my phone. Monday morning, James Chen and I had coffee. By Wednesday, we had a follow-up meeting with his team. They wanted to consult on their restaurant restructure and possibly partner on the second Hartley and Rye location. The conversation was serious, professional, exciting. The Times interview ran 2 weeks later. They asked about the partnership model, about my background, about being a woman in restaurant ownership. I told them the truth. I'd started as a server, worked my way up, saved everything, believed in the work. The interviewer asked if I did support from my family. "My mom has always believed in me," I said. That was enough. 3 weeks after the dinner, Richard sent an email. Not a text this time, a formal email. "Maya, I've had time to reflect on recent events. I was surprised by the situation, and perhaps I didn't express myself well. I want you to know that I would have been happy to support your restaurant if you'd approached me as an investor. There's still time to bring me in on the expansion if you're interested. I have connections that could be valuable. Let me know, Uncle Richard. I showed it to Laurent. He read it and snorted. He wants in now, after everything. He thinks he's doing me a favor, I said. Are you going to respond? I thought about it. I could write something polite and distant. I could explain one more time that I didn't need his support. I could tell him exactly how his years of dismissal had shaped me. Or I could just let it go. I closed the email, didn't respond, didn't delete it, just let it sit there unanswered. Some conversations aren't worth having. My mom called a few days later. She didn't mention Richard. Instead, she asked about the restaurant, about the expansion plans, about the Times article. She sounded proud. A little sad, maybe, about the family tension, but proud. Your dad would be so proud of you, she said. I know, I said, and I meant it. I kept working. The second location deal moved forward. James Chen's company came in as a minority investor, which gave us the capital we needed without sacrificing control. Laurent and I started scouting staff for the new place. And somewhere in all of that forward momentum, the weight I'd been carrying for 16 years just lifted. I didn't need Richard to see me anymore. I didn't need his approval or his validation or his belated offers of support. I had built something real, something mine, something good. And that was enough. 6 months later, we were in New York for the James Beard Awards. Laurent was a finalist again, this time in a bigger category. We didn't win, but the nomination alone was huge. Sitting in that ballroom, surrounded by the best chefs and restaurateurs in the country, I felt like I'd arrived somewhere I'd been walking toward my whole adult life. The next morning, the Michelin announcement came. 1 star. Hartley and Rye had a Michelin star. Laurent called me at 6 a.m., shouting into the phone. I was already awake, refreshing the website over and over. We'd known it was possible, but possible and real are two different things. We flew home and opened the restaurant that night like always. But there was champagne for the staff, and Laurent made a speech about how this belonged to everyone who'd put their hands and hearts into the work. He thanked me specifically. None of this happens without Maya. She's the reason we're still here. The reason we can take risks in the kitchen, because we're stable everywhere else. This star has her fingerprints all over it. The staff cheered. I tried not to cry and failed. We got written up everywhere. The local news did a segment. Food blogs exploded. Our reservation book filled up for 3 months out in about 48 hours. And through all of it, Richard said nothing. No text, no email, no awkward family group chat congratulations. He'd gone quiet. My mom told me later that he'd told people at some family event that he'd always known I'd do well, that he'd encouraged me from the start, rewriting history to make himself look better. I didn't correct it, let him have his story. It didn't change mine. The second location opened 4 months after the Michelin announcement. We hired 3 people from underprivileged backgrounds and put them through a paid culinary internship program. I wanted to be the kind of owner who created opportunities, not gate-kept them. One of the interns was a 22-year-old single mom who'd been working 2 server jobs to get by. She reminded me of myself at that age. Hungry, hardworking, underestimated. I made sure she knew she belonged there. At the opening night of the second location, my mom came. So did some cousins, a few aunts and uncles, people who'd always been kind, who'd asked questions and listened to answers. Richard wasn't invited. Diane texted me the day before. Richard heard about the opening. He's hurt he wasn't included. I didn't respond. The opening was perfect. Packed, energetic, the kitchen running smooth, the staff excited. Laurent and I stood in the doorway at the end of the night, watching the last guests filter out, and he turned to me. "We did it," he said. "Yeah," I said, "we really did." A year and a half after that night, when Richard walked into my restaurant and called me just a waitress, I was on stage at an industry conference. They'd asked me to speak about alternative ownership models in hospitality, about creating equity for workers, about building businesses that valued people over profit margins. I talked about starting as a server, about saving for 8 years, about being told I'd fail, about finding a partner who saw my value. After the panel, a young woman approached me. She was probably 24, 25. She had that look in her eyes, hungry and uncertain at the same time. "Hi," she said. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm a server right now. I want to do what you did. I want to own something someday. But I don't have a degree and I don't come from money and everyone keeps telling me to be realistic." Her voice cracked a little. "How did you keep going when no one believed in you?" I looked at her and saw myself, 16 years younger, standing in Richard's kitchen being told to stick to something simple. "First," I said, "service work is real work. Don't let anyone diminish what you're learning right now. You're learning resilience and people skills and how to perform under pressure. That matters." She nodded, eyes bright. "Second, document everything, save everything. Every tip, every shift, every bit of knowledge. Build your foundation in silence." "And third?" she asked. "Third," I said, "stop asking permission from people who can't see you. Find one person who does see you, who believes in your competence, and build with them. You don't need everyone's approval. You just need your own clarity and one good partnership." I gave her my card, told her to email me, that I was always looking for people who understood hospitality from the ground up. She thanked me, holding the card like it was something precious, and walked away. Laurent had been standing nearby. He came over, smiling. "You're good at that." "At what?" "Seeing people, the way I saw you." I thought about that, about being seen, about the difference between Richard's loud, dismissive gaze and Laurent's quiet recognition of competence. "I think that's the whole thing," I said. "People spend so much energy on the people who refuse to see them, and meanwhile there are people who already do. You just have to turn toward them instead." "Is that what you learned from all this?" he asked. I thought about it, about 16 years of grief and shame and stubborn work, about the moment Richard's face went white in a dining room full of witnesses, about everything that came after. "I learned that your worth isn't defined by who underestimates you," I said slowly. "I learned that service work is skilled work, and anyone who looks down on it is telling you about themselves, not you. I learned that the best revenge isn't confrontation, it's competence. Just build something so undeniable that their opinion becomes irrelevant." "And Richard?" Laurent asked gently. "Richard was never the villain. He was just a man who needed to feel superior, and I was convenient. Once I stopped participating in that dynamic, he lost his power. That's it. That's the whole story." Laurent nodded. "So what now?" "Now," I smiled. "Now we open location 3, and I hire more people who have been underestimated, and I keep building." "Sounds good to me." That night, I sat in my apartment, the one I'd bought a year earlier, the first place I'd ever owned, and I thought about my dad. He'd died on a roof, doing skilled work that Richard looked down on. He'd never made a lot of money, never wore expensive suits or went to fancy dinners. But he'd taught me that showing up mattered, that doing the work right mattered, that your value wasn't in your title or your paycheck, it was in your character and your craft. And somehow, through all the years of doubt and dismissal, I'd held on to that. So that's the story. That's how just a waitress became a partner, how my uncle's certainty became his blindness, how the girl he looked past ended up in the spotlight while he sat in the audience, confused about what he'd missed. If you've ever been underestimated because of your job, your background, or someone's assumptions, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment. Tell me your story. Because I promise you, you're not alone in this. And if you're building something right now in silence, while people tell you to be realistic or get serious or stop dreaming, keep going. Document everything. Find your people. Believe in your own competence even when no one else does. The people who underestimate you are giving you a gift, actually. They're getting out of your way. They're removing themselves from the story you're building. Let them. Your job is just to keep building. I'm rooting for you. Thanks for listening to my story. I'll see you in the next one. So that's what I did.